The scream was what hit him first. A thin, terrified wail swallowed almost immediately by the Saturday afternoon cacophony of downtown traffic. Honking taxis, distant sirens, the general urban hum. But not before it lanced through Alex Miller's momentary peace. He'd been on his small apartment balcony on the 19th floor, one level below the communal rooftop terrace of the 20-story residence, the Grand Sutherland. His fingers, usually so adept at defusing human crises, were currently trying to coax a stubborn tomato plant into showing signs of life. It was a small grounding ritual his father Samuel had taught him, a legacy of patience and nurturing that felt increasingly precious. Samuel, 80 years old, and with a spirit far younger, was likely upstairs on that terrace now. Alex could almost smell the faint peppery scent of the basil and rosemary Samuel cultivated in his approved containers, a familiar comfort that often drifted down. Samuel loved that rooftop. It was his small patch of solace, his connection to the sky, and the city's sprawling vista, especially since moving in with Alex and Maria after Martha Alex's mother passed away 2 years prior. Then came a different sound, a sickening scrape of heavy ceramic on concrete, like a large pot being dragged, followed by a shout, indistinct but harsh, undeniably female, and laced with a chilling edge of command. Alex's blood ran cold. He was on his feet in an instant, the half-empty watering can clattering to the balcony floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. A dreadful premonition, a vague unease that had been simmering for weeks, solidified into icy certainty, even before he craned his neck, his gaze shooting upwards towards the familiar outline of the terrace. What he saw would be seared into his memory for eternity, a grotesque tableau against the vast, indifferent blue of the early May sky. His father, Samuel, looking impossibly frail and small, silhouetted against the glittering backdrop of glass and steel skyscrapers. Samuel's body was teetering precariously already halfway over the low, stylishly modern parapet wall of the rooftop terrace. One hand gnarled with age, but still capable of such gentle tending, scrabbled desperately for purchase on the smooth, unforgiving stone. The other flailed in the empty air, a silent testament to a desperate failing struggle. And behind him a figure solid and implacable, her posture rigid with intent, Eleanor Albright, the formidable, immaculately dressed president of their building's homeowners association. Her arm was outstretched, not in a gesture of help, not in an attempt to pull him back, but in a clear, final, horrifying push. "No," Alex roared, a guttural sound torn from the depths of his soul, but he was already moving his body, reacting before his conscious mind could fully process the horror. His training, honed by years as the Chief Police Negotiator for the city, instantly kicked into high gear, a desperate attempt to override the filial terror that threatened to paralyze him. He saw Samuel's frail form tip irrevocably over the edge, a small, dark shape beginning its sickening plummet. For a horrifying fraction of a second, Alex's world stopped. The city noise faded. His breath hitched. The image of his father, the man who taught him patience with those stubborn tomato plants, who read him stories of courage and resilience, who embodied quiet dignity, now a falling leaf against an uncaring urban canvas tore through him with physical pain. Then his training slammed back into place, a cold, necessary mechanism. Guilt, sharp and immediate, pricked at him. He'd known Albright was a problem. He'd seen her disdain for his father for other elderly residents. He'd argued with Samuel just last night, Samuel recounting Albright's latest veiled threat during a courtesy call about maintaining the building's exclusive appeal and ensuring all residents contribute to its vibrant image. Alex, to his eternal shame, had somewhat dismissed it as her usual power-tripping bluster, advising Samuel to just lay low. He hadn't imagined this. He hadn't conceived of this level of malice. "Maria," he yelled, his voice cracking as he scrambled back into their apartment. "Maria." His wife looked up from her laptop, her face instantly reflecting his terror. Call 911, man overboard, rooftop 227 Grand Avenue. Tell them it's a push potential jumper, no pushed request. Full high-angle rescue response, immediate air cushion deployment north side of the building. Tell them Chief Miller is on scene, my father. He didn't wait for her reply already, at the small credenza by the door, grabbing his police radio from its charger, his keys, his service weapon. A grim instinct he hoped he wouldn't need. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Height of the building approximately 200 feet. Wind conditions a slight westerly breeze he'd noted earlier. Probable trajectory factoring in the push. Response time for the specialized fire department rescue unit. His father. Oh God, his father. The city, his city, the one he worked tirelessly to keep safe, had just become the stage for his worst nightmare. Each beat of his heart was a count against Samuel's chances. He burst into the hallway, sprinting for the emergency stairs, taking them 3 at a time, his lungs burning the metallic taste of adrenaline in his mouth. His radio was already pressed to his ear, his thumb depressing the transmit button, overriding the local precinct channel. Dispatch, this is Chief Negotiator Miller, personal emergency, repeat, personal emergency. My father, Samuel Miller, has been pushed from the rooftop of 227 Grand Avenue. I am on scene, ascending to the roof. Expedite high-angle rescue and air cushion deployment, northeast quadrant. Suspect is still on the roof. Repeat, suspect is on the roof. Female Caucasian, mid-60s, HOA president, name is Eleanor Albright. Ort. Copy Chief Miller. A startled but professional voice came back the dispatcher's calm, a stark contrast to the chaos in Alex's chest. Units are en route. High angle and air cushion confirmed. Fire Department Rescue 1 is primary. ETA 5 minutes for first patrol responders, 7 for specialized rescue and cushion. 7 minutes. An eternity. Could Samuel survive a 20-story fall? The logical part of his brain screamed, no, absolutely not. Unless. The air cushion. It was their only hope. A slim, desperate chance. A cold dread washed over him even as he pounded up the concrete stairs. Was he leveraging his position too much? Using his title to expedite? The thought felt like a betrayal of his own carefully cultivated professional ethics, a line he'd sworn never to cross. But his father's life? There was no choice, was there? He shoved the internal debate down a bitter pill that would surely resurface later. Right now, Samuel was all that mattered. He reached the heavy steel door to the rooftop, the terrace access sign, mockingly cheerful. He slammed it open with his shoulder, bursting onto the sun-drenched space. The scene was almost surreal. Several residents who had been enjoying the afternoon sun were frozen in various states of shock and disbelief, their faces pale, some pointing, others covering their mouths. And there, near the herb planters, stood Eleanor Albright. She was smoothing down the front of her impeccable linen dress, a picture of composure. For a horrifying, fleeting moment before she registered his presence, Alex thought he saw not just satisfaction, but a strange, almost serene look on her face, as if a great persistent burden had finally been lifted. Her cheeks even had a slight flush, as if from exertion or triumph. Then, as she saw him, her expression shifted with a speed that was itself alarming instantly, transforming into one of practiced horror and distress. "Oh, Alex, thank God you're here," she cried, her voice artfully modulated to convey shock and grief, rushing towards him with hands outstretched, as if seeking comfort or offering aid. "It was terrible, your father. He was so agitated this afternoon, muttering about how the city was closing in on him, how he couldn't breathe. He climbed up on the wall. I tried to talk him down. Alex, I swear I did. I reached for him, tried to grab him, but he just let go. He slipped right through my fingers." Her voice was laced with a theatrical tremor, but her eyes, Alex noted with a negotiator's chilling clarity, were cold, assessing his reaction. calculating. She was already building her defense, establishing her narrative. Alex felt a surge of white-hot rage so intense it momentarily blurred his vision. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, so utterly disrespectful to the man who was at that very moment plummeting towards the unforgiving pavement below. He wanted to launch himself at her, to shake the truth out of her, but he couldn't. Not now. His father was falling. His priority, his only priority, was Samuel. He could deal with this monster, this calculating performer, later. The negotiator in him, the part that analyzed and strategized even in the face of profound personal trauma, took over. "Stay right there, Eleanor," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous, cutting through her feigned distress. He didn't have time for her lies. He forced himself to the edge of the parapet, the wind whipping at his face, his stomach churning. His negotiator's mind was assessing his eyes, scanning the ground far below, trying to pinpoint where Samuel might land, his voice strained, but clear, shouting into his radio. "Dispatch, victim is falling on the northeast quadrant, approximately 20 feet out from the base of the building target zone. For air cushion, needs to be precise. Wind shear from the west at this altitude is a factor." He could hear the wail of approaching sirens now growing louder, closer, a desperate, hopeful countdown. He looked down, his heart constricting. He could see Samuel, a small, terrifyingly vulnerable shape, arms and legs splayed, falling. Time seemed to stretch, to warp into an agonizing crawl. He could almost feel the wind rushing past his own face, the sickening sensation of endless descent. He gripped the radio, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. "Firecom, this is Miller. Are you visual on the target zone?" "Talk to me. Give me an update." "Chief Miller, this is Captain Rossi Rescue 1. We are on Grand Avenue deploying cushion now." The voice was tight with urgency, professional but strained. "We have eyes on... We see him adjusting for shear. Almost there?" "Now." Alex couldn't breathe. He watched, a helpless spectator to his father's fate, as Samuel's descent continued. It was too fast, too far. This couldn't be happening. Then from the street below, a massive yellow and red inflatable cushion began to bloom with astonishing speed, a vibrant splash of color against the gray concrete, expertly maneuvered by a dozen focused firefighters. It was a race against gravity, a frantic, desperate gamble against impossible odds. The cushion swelled, a beacon of improbable hope. And then impact. Not the sickening final thud he had braced himself for, the sound that had already begun to echo in his nightmares, but a softer, more muffled sound as Samuel's body hit the very edge of the inflated surface. He bounced once, a terrible ragdoll movement, then again before rolling almost gently towards the center. He was down. He was on the cushion. He wasn't a smear on the pavement. A collective gasp, a wave of audible relief went up from the stunned residents on the rooftop. Alex felt his knees buckle, relief so potent it was physically painful, threatening to rob him of his remaining strength. He leaned heavily against the parapet, his body trembling uncontrollably. "Status," he croaked into the radio, his voice barely a whisper. "Rossi, what's his status?" "Victim is on the cushion, Chief." Rossi's voice, though still tight, was now laced with a clear note of triumph. "Conscious, I repeat, Samuel Miller is conscious, breathing on his own. Medical team moving in now. Incredible catch, Chief, incredible." Conscious. His father was conscious. Alex closed his eyes for a fleeting second, a silent, choked prayer of thanks escaping his lips. The image of his father tending his herbs, his gentle smile. It might not be a memory yet. Then he opened his eyes, and they were chips of ice as he turned to face Eleanor Albright. She was still maintaining her look of distressed innocence, dabbing at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief she'd produced from somewhere. But seeing the raw, unadulterated fury in Alex's eyes, a flicker of genuine fear quickly masked crossed her face. She hadn't expected Samuel to survive. That much was clear. The surprise, the momentary disruption to her plan was visible before the mask of concern snapped back. "You—" Alex said, his voice dangerously quiet, each word laden with the weight of what he had witnessed, "are under arrest for the attempted murder of Samuel Miller." Two uniformed patrol officers first on the scene after Alex had just emerged onto the rooftop, their expressions grim as they took in the situation, their hands instinctively resting near their holstered weapons. They had heard his radio transmission. They saw the look on their chief negotiator's face. Attempted murder. Albright gasped, clutching her chest theatrically, her eyes wide with feigned disbelief. "Alex, how can you say such a thing? After what I tried to do, I tried to save him. It was a tragic accident. The poor man was leaning too far. He got dizzy. He was always a bit unsteady." She gestured vaguely towards the edge. "He was always a nuisance up here, a danger to himself and others. You know how he gets forgetful, confused. Save that for your lawyer, Mrs. Albright." Alex set his voice like granite. He nodded to the officers. "She pushed him. I saw it. There are other witnesses." He gestured to the horrified residents who were now beginning to find their voices murmuring in shock and agreement, their fear of Albright momentarily eclipsed by the horror of what they'd seen. One resident, Mrs. Henderson from 12B, a kind woman with a shared love of gardening with Samuel, looked particularly shaken, but stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I saw her, officer," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Albright. "She invited Mr. Miller up here this afternoon. She left a note for him, a beautifully written one, I saw it on his door earlier, saying she wanted to discuss his concerns about the new bylaws to find common ground. Then she gestured for him to look over the edge and she pushed him. It didn't look like she was trying to help at all." As the officers moved in their expressions, resolute Mrs. Albright's meticulously constructed composure finally shattered. The mask of the concerned community leader fell away, revealing the arrogant entitlement and simmering rage beneath. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking, morphing from cultured tones to a raw, ugly sound. "I am the president of this homeowners association. I have rights. This is an outrage. He's using his position against me because he's upset. He's distraught. He doesn't know what he's saying." She struggled as the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped onto her wrists, her carefully coiffed silver hair falling into disarray strands clinging to her sweating forehead. "My husband is Arthur Albright. He built half this city. He'll destroy you. He'll have your badge, Officer Miller, or whatever your pathetic title is." There was a wildness in her eyes now, a desperation that hinted at something more profound than just losing control of an HOA dispute. Alex just looked at her, his face a mask of controlled fury, his own internal battle raging, the need for justice warring with the professional discipline to remain detached. "My name is Chief Alex Miller," he stated, his voice level despite the turmoil inside. "And the only thing I regret, Mrs. Albright, is not realizing sooner just how dangerous and depraved you truly are." He turned away from her, then, unable to look at her venomous face any longer, back to the parapet, his gaze fixed on the activity far below, where paramedics were now carefully transferring his father from the air cushion to a stretcher. His father was alive. That was all that mattered for now. The fight for justice and the torturous investigation into why this had happened was just beginning, and the gnawing question, the one that would haunt his sleepless nights, returned with a vengeance. Had he, by challenging her before, by encouraging his father's own quiet defiance, inadvertently pushed her to this horrific extreme? The setup for this nightmare, Alex now realized with sickening clarity, had been insidious, a slow burn of escalating microaggressions and thinly veiled contempt, all orchestrated by Eleanor Albright since Samuel had moved in. Samuel, a retired botanist with a gentle soul, and a deep love for growing things had found solace on the building's rooftop terrace, transforming his small allotted space into a surprisingly green oasis in the concrete jungle. He'd set up a small herb garden in approved containers and would spend hours there reading, sketching, or simply watching the city breathe. It was his sanctuary, his quiet rebellion against the confines of his aging body. For Mrs. Albright, however, Samuel's presence, his untidy herbs, his mere existence as an elderly man contentedly existing in her carefully curated domain, was an affront. She ruled the HOA with an iron fist and a ledger of arcane bylaws, her primary concerns being property values and an almost fanatical adherence to her personal aesthetic standards, which seemed to translate into a disdain for anything or anyone she deemed imperfect, unproductive, or simply not fitting her vision of affluent, youthful dynamism. It wasn't just Samuel. Other elderly residents, Alex recalled, had mentioned quiet, persistent harassment, petty fines for non-existent violations, sudden, essential maintenance that made communal areas inaccessible, and a general, pervasive atmosphere of being unwelcome, of being slowly squeezed out. Alex had initially dismissed these complaints, even Samuel's, as typical HOA power tripping, the kind of bureaucratic nonsense one unfortunately encountered in such buildings. He'd been tragically, catastrophically wrong. He had underestimated the darkness lurking beneath the polished veneer. The inciting incident, the one that had clearly marked Samuel as a direct target, had been a new proposed bylaw Albright had introduced at the last HOA meeting. To preserve the dynamic atmosphere and enhance the aesthetic value of communal recreational areas, access may be restricted for residents requiring mobility aids or those whose prolonged sedentary presence detracts from the active use and visual harmony intended for such spaces. It was a clear, targeted attack on Samuel and other elderly or disabled residents, an attempt to legislate them into invisibility. Samuel, with his quiet dignity but unshakable moral compass, had spoken out against it. Alex hadn't been there, a work commitment he now deeply regretted. But Samuel had recounted the confrontation later, his voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with indignation. "This building is a community, Mrs. Albright." He'd said, his voice surprisingly firm and carrying in the hushed room. "Not just an investment portfolio. People live here. People age here. We are not disposable inconveniences to be swept aside for a better view or a higher selling price." Albright Samuel reported had stared him down, her face, a mask of cold fury. Her only response a curt, "Your objections are noted, Mr. Miller. The board will take them under advisement." That had been a week ago. This morning, Mrs. Henderson confirmed Albright had left a beautifully calligraphed note for Samuel, an olive branch that was in reality a viper's kiss, inviting him to the rooftop for a private discussion to find common ground regarding the proposed bylaw and your valuable input. A lure to his own execution. Later, in the sterile beeping environment of the ICU waiting room, Maria clutched Alex's hand, her own trembling. Samuel was undergoing a battery of tests. The initial prognosis was grim, but hopeful: multiple fractures, a broken hip, several ribs, a shattered wrist, and severe bruising, but miraculously no critical internal or head injuries. The air cushion Captain Rossi had explained had performed its life-saving miracle, though Samuel's recovery would be long, arduous, and painful. "Why, Alex?" Maria whispered, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. "Why would anyone do that? It can't just be about some herbs or a discriminatory bylaw. That's monstrous, but this is beyond comprehension." "I don't know, Maria," Alex admitted, his voice grim, his mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had, the whispers he'd heard. "But her husband? Arthur Albright? He's a big-time property developer, known for aggressive tactics, for buying up buildings, forcing out tenants. There has to be more to this. This feels strategic, calculated." A cold suspicion was forming a disturbing pattern beginning to emerge from the shadows. He'd heard whispers about Arthur Albright's methods, the way entire buildings were repositioned for upscale markets, but he'd never connected them to their own building, to Eleanor's increasingly tyrannical HOA reign. My son, Albright was released on a shockingly high bail. The next day, Arthur Albright's influence palpable in the speed and efficiency of the legal maneuvering. The conditions were strict. A restraining order barring her from any contact with the Millers or Mrs. Henderson's surrender of her passport confinement to her penthouse apartment, except for legal and medical appointments. But she was back in the building, a malevolent presence just floors away, a constant, unnerving reminder of her capacity for violence. Her high-powered lawyer was already spinning a narrative to the press, a tragic accident, a confused elderly man, Eleanor Albright, the selfless hero trying to save him. Alex Miller, the grieving, overzealous son, abusing his police authority in a personal vendetta. The first direct threat arrived 2 days later. It wasn't a crude scrawl, but something far more insidious. A small potted tomato plant, identical to the one Samuel cherished on his own small balcony, and the one Alex had been tending, was left smashed outside Alex and Maria's apartment door. Its tender green shoots were crushed, its soil scattered. With it tucked into the broken ceramic was a typed note on expensive cardstock. Some things don't thrive when they're in the way of progress. It's best to let them go. Drop your misguided crusade. Maria found it, and her gasp was audible from the living room. The message was chillingly personal, a clear escalation. Alex felt a fresh wave of guilt, sharp and suffocating. His pursuit of justice, was he now actively endangering Maria, making Samuel even more of a target? The weight of that possibility was crushing. The pressure mounted relentlessly. Alex was juggling his demanding job as Chief Negotiator, a role that required immense emotional control and strategic thinking, with daily heartbreaking hospital visits to Samuel, fending off the insidious legal attacks from Albright's team and the gnawing anxiety of Albright's presence in their very building. He felt stretched thin, his emotional reserves dwindling. He knew investigating Albright himself was a massive conflict of interest, a line he couldn't officially cross. But his friend Detective Dave Rourke, a sharp, tenacious investigator, was assigned the case. "She's got a fortress of lawyers, Alex." Dave warned him over a hurried coffee, his expression grim. "They're already trying to subpoena Samuel's full medical records going back years, painting him as senile, depressed, a suicide risk. They're trying to shred his credibility before he can even give a formal statement." "He's not Dave. You know he's not." Alex insisted, his fists clenched. "She's trying to destroy him, to silence him, because he saw something or he knew something." Alex felt that familiar surge of guilt again. If he'd taken Samuel's earlier complaints about Albright more seriously, if he hadn't been so consumed by his own work, perhaps. The thought was a constant, tormenting refrain. Then, a week after the incident, when Alex was at his lowest feeling, the walls closing in a breakthrough arrived in the most unexpected way. He received a cryptic, heavily encrypted email. The sender ID was simply, "Watcher 227, Grand Sutherland." The subject line read, "Eleanor Albright, not her first rooftop rendezvous." His heart pounded as he decrypted it using software he hadn't touched since his early days in cybercrimes. The sender claimed to be a former IT contractor for the Grand Sutherland, fired by Albright after discovering certain irregularities in her private network setup. The email hinted in chillingly vague terms that Albright maintained a comprehensive and highly covert surveillance system, far beyond typical building security one that monitored more than just common areas. More horrifyingly, it alleged that she had been involved in a remarkably similar incident years ago in a different luxury building, the Solstice Tower, where an elderly resident, a vocal opponent of one of Arthur Albright's controversial redevelopment projects, had a convenient and fatal accident. The official ruling was accidental death, no foul play suspected. But Watcher 227 implied Albright had sanitized the digital evidence, ensuring the truth remained buried. The email ended with a stark warning. "She controls what's seen, Chief Miller, and she's always watching. Be careful who's watching you." This was the midpoint twist, the earth-shattering revelation that recast Eleanor Albright from a merely malevolent neighborhood despot into something far more sinister, far more calculated. She wasn't just a petty tyrant obsessed with aesthetics and control. She was potentially a repeat offender, a cold-blooded enforcer, a key player in her husband's predatory real estate schemes. They used HOAs as a tool to systematically harass, intimidate, and drive out long-term or undesirable residents from valuable properties. Samuel wasn't just an eyesore to her twisted sensibilities. He was an obstacle, a vocal opponent, and perhaps he knew too much or was inspiring too much resistance among the other tenants. The Rooftop incident wasn't just about a discriminatory bylaw or a personal vendetta. It was part of a larger, more terrifying pattern of calculated elimination. Alex immediately contacted Dave Rourke, his voice tight with a mixture of horror and grim determination. "This Watcher 227, if this is true, Dave, she's been doing this for years. This is organized. This is a conspiracy." The thought that he and his family were living in the same building as someone capable of such cold, calculated evil, someone who might have killed before and gotten away with it, was terrifying. His protective instincts, already on high alert for Samuel, now extended to Maria, to himself, to every vulnerable resident in the Grand Sutherland. Dave, a hardened detective, listened intently, his skepticism warring with the chilling details. "An anonymous email isn't probable cause for a murder investigation from years ago, Alex, you know that. But if she does have an extensive private surveillance system in this building, that's a different story. And if she has a history of tampering with evidence in a previous case." He drummed his fingers on his desk. "It paints a very ugly picture, but we need more than hints from a ghost in the machine." The risk was immense. If Albright caught even a whisper that they were looking into her private systems, she could wipe everything clean. They needed a warrant and fast. But on what grounds? The anonymous email, while compelling, was thin. Alex felt a surge of frustration. His hands were tied by the very rules he upheld. He couldn't just kick down her door. As if sensing their dilemma, Watcher 227 sent another encrypted email a day later. "She's getting nervous. Overheard her on a call with Arthur. She's talking about upgrading her entire surveillance and data storage system next week. That means erasing everything, Chief. Destroying the old server. You don't have much time. Jory." Crucially, this email also contained a highly technical detail about how Albright's primary surveillance server was supposedly isolated from the building's main security network, air-gapped in certain ways, and had a proprietary encrypted operating system, making it harder to access legally or technically without specific knowledge. It also mentioned a failsafe, a suspected data self-destruct mechanism, if unauthorized access was detected. This new information detailing the imminent destruction of potential evidence and the sophisticated nature of the system combined with Mrs. Henderson's eyewitness account of the push and the previous threat against Alex gave Dave Rourke just enough leverage. He argued before a duty judge that Albright had the means, motive, and opportunity and was now actively planning to destroy evidence related to the attempted murder of Samuel Miller. They got a limited, very specific warrant to seize and image Albright's personal surveillance server located within her penthouse apartment. The catch: they had to do it while she was likely to be home to prevent remote wiping if she was alerted, and the warrant specified only the imaging of the drive related to her surveillance network, not a full unrestricted search of her opulent apartment. It was a surgical strike fraught with legal and technical peril. The climax was set for the following evening. Dave Alex officially present as an observer due to the personal connection, but a tense Chief Miller acutely aware of the legal tightrope he was walking and the potential for accusations of abuse of power, and a top police tech expert, Anya Sharma, arrived at Albright's penthouse door. Maria had pleaded with Alex not to go, terrified of what Albright might do, but he knew he had to be there. He needed to see this through for Samuel, for himself. Albright, dressed in a silk lounge suit, was the picture of affronted indignation, but faced with the warrant presented by Detective Rourke, reluctantly allowed them access to the climate-controlled study where her server was housed, a sleek, imposing black tower humming quietly in a custom-built cabinet. Anya Sharma, calm and focused, amidst the palpable tension, began the delicate process of connecting her equipment, her goal to create a bit-for-bit image of terabytes of data. It was a race against time, against potential remote commands, against the hinted-at self-destruct. Albright watched them, her face a mask of cold fury, occasionally making pointed, loud calls to her lawyer, complaining of harassment and police overreach. "You're violating my rights, Detective," Albright hissed, her eyes flicking to Alex with particular venom. "This is nothing but a vendetta because my husband won't let your father extort us with his fabricated story. You're all in on it." She then turned to Alex, her voice suddenly dropping, becoming softer, almost conspiratorial, a tactic he recognized from countless negotiations. "Alex, you're a man of the world. You understand how things work. Sometimes, difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good, for progress, for maintaining value. My own father, he lost everything, his reputation, his health in a disastrous development deal many years ago. A single poorly managed property, a blight, as they called it, dragged down an entire district. It destroyed him, made him a broken man. I swore then, Alex, I swore I'd never let that happen to my family, to Arthur's vision, to what we've built." A flicker of what might have been genuine pain crossed her features, a glimpse of a past trauma, but it was instantly overshadowed by a chillingly ruthless determination. Samuel Miller, with his constant complaints, his rallying of the other anachronisms. In this building, he was standing in the way of something much bigger, something that would benefit hundreds, secure the future. He was becoming a blight himself. Suddenly, Anya's eyes widened. Her fingers froze over her keyboard. "Detective Chief, the server has an internal thermite charge. It's armed. I'm seeing diagnostic flags I didn't anticipate. If the main power is cut unexpectedly, or if it detects an unauthorized breach at a deep hardware level, it'll slag the drives. And based on these readings, it's on a countdown timer that just activated. We have maybe 3 minutes tops to get what we can before it turns into a very expensive paperweight." Albright smirked a thin, triumphant smile. "My private data is very secure, officers, as it should be." "Not secure enough, Mrs. Albright." Anya set her fingers flying across her portable console, her brow furrowed in intense concentration. "I can't get a full image in time. I'm prioritizing directories with recent timestamps, anything linked to Rooftop camera feeds, and any recently accessed archive folders. It's a gamble which sectors will yield the most." The air in the room crackled with tension. Alex could hear his own heart pounding. Sparks suddenly flew from the server casing, followed by a wisp of acrid smoke. "It's going," Anya yelled, yanking her cable free just as the server emitted a sickening internal groan. "Got a partial clone, mostly recent footage from the active partitions, but it's something the core OS sectors seem to have fried first." Back at the precinct, in the sterile environment of the digital forensics lab, they reviewed the salvaged, partially corrupted data. The footage of Samuel on the rooftop, Albright approaching him, their heated argument, and then the undeniable cold-blooded push. It was horrifyingly clear, even with some minor pixelation. The audio was patchy, but captured her words chillingly calm. "You and your kind are a blight, Samuel. This building is for the future, not for relics of the past. Arthur needs this floor clear, and you're holding up progress. But then Anya, painstakingly reconstructing fragmented files from the damaged sectors, found something else, something buried in a mislabeled archive folder that the thermite hadn't completely obliterated footage from another camera, a covert one cleverly disguised as a smoke detector in the stairwell leading to the rooftop. It showed Eleanor Albright minutes before she lured Samuel to his near death, speaking on her phone, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, Arthur." She was saying, her back to the hidden camera, but her reflection visible in a polished brass fixture. "It's time. The old man is becoming more trouble than he's worth. He's been rallying the other long-term residents, talking to that Henderson woman, drafting petitions. He's actually organizing them. It's just like that dreadful Mrs. Petroff down at the Solstice Tower. Remember, a little nudge, a tragic accident. The lawyers handle the rest. This rooftop offers such a permanent and aesthetically pleasing solution." Crucially, the recovered data also contained fragmented logs and blurry stills from other hidden cameras, showing Samuel earlier that very day speaking earnestly with Mrs. Henderson and two other elderly residents in the building's private library, a small sheaf of papers in his hand, clearly planning their resistance to Albright's bylaws. Eleanor Albright hadn't just seen him as an inconvenience. She'd identified him as an active, credible threat to her and Arthur's multi-million-dollar scheme. "We got her, Alex," Dave breathed, stunned, pointing to the screen where Albright's reflected face was frozen in a moment of damning confession. "This isn't just attempted murder of Samuel. This is conspiracy, a pattern of behavior, premeditation. She just implicated herself and Arthur in a previous potential homicide." Alex felt a complex wave of emotions, grim vindication, profound sadness for his father's ordeal, and a sliver of relief that his own desperate, ethically borderline actions had yielded such undeniable proof. His father hadn't just been a passive victim. He'd been a fighter, and that in Eleanor Albright's twisted world had sealed his fate. The falling action was swift and dramatic. Faced with the undeniable video and audio evidence from her own compromised system, including the damning phone call that connected her actions to a potential previous crime, and her husband's direct involvement, Eleanor Albright's bail was immediately revoked. The investigation expanded rapidly, becoming a major citywide scandal, targeting not just Eleanor, but also Arthur Albright and their entire real estate operation. The Watcher 27, later identified as the disgruntled former IT contractor, came forward, officially his identity protected, providing more damning evidence of their methods, including financial records and blueprints for other buildings with similarly covert surveillance capabilities. Other victims from past building takeovers, people who had been silenced by fear or expensive legal battles, emerged from the woodwork, emboldened by the Albrights' public downfall. Henderson, galvanized by Samuel's courage and the horrific attack, started organizing the residents of the Grand Sutherland for real, demanding an immediate overhaul of the HOA, full transparency, and new elections. The community, however, was initially divided. Some residents, particularly newer ones who had benefited from Albright-led improvements or who were intimidated by Arthur Albright's lingering influence in the city, remained loyal or silent. Others, long oppressed or simply horrified, rallied behind Mrs. Henderson and Alex. Arthur Albright, through his phalanx of expensive lawyers, made one last desperate attempt to control the damage. He approached Alex indirectly via a prominent city councilman he had in his pocket. The offer was staggering: a lifetime, fully staffed penthouse apartment for Samuel anywhere in the city, a multi-million-dollar charitable donation to any police benevolent fund Alex named, and a public apology from Eleanor citing extreme stress and a momentary lapse of judgment if Alex would just encourage his father to recall the events less clearly, to perhaps suggest Samuel's fall was indeed more of an accident, a misunderstanding. Alex, looking at a recent photo of Samuel in his hospital bed, painstakingly trying to relearn how to hold a pen, his spirit battered, but not broken, his eyes still holding that spark of gentle defiance, refused without a second thought. His integrity, his father's dignity wasn't for sale at any price. The councilman's thinly veiled threats about Alex's career prospects, if he didn't see reason, were met with a cold stare and a referral to Detective Rourke. The trial, when it finally came months later, was a media sensation. Eleanor Albright, confronted with her own chilling words and the mountain of evidence detailing her systematic cruelty, attempted to use her past family tragedy, the financial ruin of her father, as a defense, a warped justification for her ruthless pursuit of control and perfection in her properties. It was a desperate, transparent ploy that the jury saw through. She and Arthur Albright were found guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy racketeering, and for Eleanor, the attempted murder of Samuel Miller and a reopened investigation into the death of Mrs. Petrov. The sentences were substantial, ensuring they would not be preying on vulnerable residents for a very long time. For Samuel, the resolution was a slow, painful, but ultimately triumphant journey. His physical recovery was arduous, marked by setbacks and grueling physiotherapy. Alex, plagued by his initial dismissiveness of Samuel's concerns, found it hard to forgive himself. He spent hours by Samuel's bedside, the unspoken guilt a heavy presence between them, until Samuel, sensing his son's turmoil, took Alex's hand one afternoon. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Son," he said, his voice raspy but firm, "you can't carry the weight of what if. That path leads only to regret. You carry the weight of what now. You fought for justice, not just for me, but for all of them, for the very soul of this place. That's enough. More than enough. You did good, Alex." Those words were a balm to Alex's bruised conscience. Months later, the Grand Sutherland's HOA, now completely reformed under the interim presidency of a determined Mrs. Henderson, unveiled the Samuel Miller Resilience Garden on the rooftop terrace. The low parapet wall had been replaced with a higher, safer railing, interwoven with flowering vines. Samuel, leaning heavily on his cane, but standing tall, addressed the gathered residents, a crowd that now felt more like a true community. "Mrs. Albright, and those like her," he said, his voice gaining strength, "saw people like me, perhaps people like some of you, as disposable as obstacles to their ambition. But she was wrong. Every life has value, every voice matters, and together our voices can be a mighty force." He then, with Alex and Maria proudly at his side, presented each long-term resident who had stood against Albright and those who had been her victims with a small potted tomato plant grown from the seeds of his own cherished plants. "Let us grow something beautiful here together," he urged them. "Let us be vigilant, and let us always, always be kind." Alex watched Maria's hand held tightly in his, as his father, a quiet botanist, distributed his living symbols of hope. The city skyline stretched before them, no longer an indifferent backdrop, but a witness to a community that had faced profound darkness and chosen light. The journey had been fraught with difficult choices, the line between his professional duty and his personal crusade often blurred and agonizing. But looking at his father, surrounded by neighbors now united by a shared ordeal and a renewed sense of purpose, Alex knew that justice in its fullest, most meaningful sense had finally taken root in the heart of the Grand Sutherland. The view from the rooftop, once a scene of terror, was now finally clear and full of promise.